Okay. So the first thing to do is to go back to the SyncToolbox webpage for a second, just so I can show you a resource that's really valuable, which is, so we use the download section. There's getting help, tutorial and function reference. If you go to tutorial, you end up on this brilliant website with a whole bunch of demos, okay? With code written especially for you to essentially to take as a starting point for something else, okay? So I tried out a couple of things here. So actually I looked at the moving square demo, so I wrote this moving square thing in MGL a couple of years ago, and I can't even remember whether I was just trying to replicate what they were doing as a demo, but there's the equivalent, nearly equivalent psychtoolbox code for what we just did in MGL is here, okay? So I'm actually going to take this code and I'm going to copy it rather than trying to make everything happen from zero. Let's try and walk through this script and actually try and understand what's going on. And then we'll make a slightly more detailed, I mean, there's some comments in here already, right? But maybe we can also add a few more extra comments and maybe change it around a little bit, okay? And I'll show you a couple of extra things that might come in handy. So I'm just going to go and copy that one. Okay, so this is just, it's animating basic shapes and dots. You know, this is section 3, and it was the moving square demo from that website. Okay, so I'll go back here. Actually, I'll put it into a completely new script so we can run it independently, okay? So I'll say, please look at SyncToolbox example, okay, script. Now I'll make a new script. I paste the stuff in from the web page, and I'm gonna save as SyncToolbox example script. Okay. And then, so to make sure that we know, first of all, we know how to get back to the code that was originally posted, and also to make sure that we're not plagiarizing, we're not calling ourselves that brilliant. Let's make sure we credit this appropriately. This code is taken from with some extra comments and small modifications. DS2, and you just put your name, right? So you remember you did it. Okay. So we can try and run this. I think what's going to happen is we're going to get an error message that says something about the timing is not correct. Or maybe it will work. Okay. Oh no, it does work actually. So if you get a warning or it refuses to run, just let me know and I'll come around. Yeah, okay. You get something that says sync, skip. Okay. Yeah, so for me, this is a warning, right? For you, this might be an error message. There's this little bit of code here that says screen preference skip sync tests. Okay, do you see that in your error messages? Okay. Okay. Well, so then let me type it in, and we can do it together. So I'll copy it. After SCA, close all and clear vars, we need to enter a bit of code that says screen preference skip sync tests true, right? So or 1. Skip sync tests 1. Okay. So why do we need this? Well, it turns out that the timing on the Macs isn't perfect, And rather than allowing you to run a script that doesn't quite work perfectly, SyncToolbox decides to throw an error and not let you do it at all. Okay? So rather than sort of presenting stuff in a wonky way, they say, hold on, we can't do it properly, I'm not going to do it at all. And as a general rule, that's actually quite a good thing to do, right? If your code doesn't, if you put in some places where if the user does something wrong, it throws an error message, that might seem like it's an annoying thing, but at least you get an error message and you know something is happening, right? If you instead sneakily change all the values that it can't interpret to 0, you might, something like in your analysis, you might get out a wrong answer and you will never know that it happened, right? So actually throwing an error and being aggressive about that is a good idea. Okay, and I'll maybe show you a function that will allow you to put that in your code as well. Okay, so let me just make a note of that so I don't forget about that. Okay, so now that we have screen preference skip SyncTests in there and you press the run button, does it run now? If you press the play button. Can you get it to work? No? So then, okay, I see what's happening. Okay, that, yeah, sorry, that didn't happen to me. Okay. If it can't find SyncToolbox, well, then the issue is something, it's nothing to do with SyncToolbox. Okay, thanks very much for pointing this out to me. If you say set path again, and you need to make sure that SyncToolbox appears on there. If you can't see that, then you need to add with subfolders. We need to go to all the way up to the machine. To the Mac, whatever your number is, iMac, whatever number you're on. Users, shared, SyncToolbox. Okay? So this is a path issue, which is basically that MATLAB doesn't know where to look for the code. Okay? And that's because when we installed it, if this was your own machine, you would be allowed to save the path and then it would be done with it. But because it's not your own machine, you're not allowed to do it. So every time you do something, it sort of resets. Okay? So if you add that, so I'm not going to do it because mine's already on it. But if you say open and then you just close this window, in this list here, you should see somewhere user shared SyncToolbox with a whole bunch of subfolders, okay? If you can't see that, then that was the issue. Okay? So close it. It will ask you, maybe it will complain that it can't save the path for this session, but that's fine, okay? And then, hopefully it will work, okay? This is all in the recording, so it's all, this is real life. This is happening. Okay, works. Okay, good. Okay, cool. You got another problem?
No, I was just saying, even if it should save the path.
Yeah. Did you add with subfolders? I don't know. Okay. So, yeah, so that was a typo. Okay. If you want to quit it, you hit the escape key, and then you're done. Okay. All right. So it's always a good idea to start with these scripts, right? Because you could probably go crazy trying to figure out whether it's you that's the problem or whether SyncToolbox has changed or whatever. if you can't get one of the demos to work, then chances are there's something wrong with your setup or paths or whatever. So this is a good thing to try out, okay? So this first thing that we included here basically says, even though the timing on the Macs is a little bit wonky, still go ahead. That's why you get the big red warning sign. It's a bit in your face, but I guess that's fine. I don't actually know what all the psych default setup things do, but we could look at the description for that if we wanted to dig in a little bit deeper. So get the screen numbers. So this is to make sure that when you are on a machine that has multiple devices attached to it, like multiple screens, you find out which ones of them they are, okay? So maybe there is more than one screen, okay? The way they are numbered is basically like one is, I think, 1 or 0 is this main screen. The next one is the next display that's connected. Maybe in a physiology rig, and you have a screen that where you look at some, data that's coming in from somewhere else, and then the stimulus computer is the next display, and you're running it all from the same computer. Then maybe you have 2 or 3 things attached to it. So max screens basically says, take the largest one, take the one that's the final one that was attached. So actually, let me do the following. So we can, if we make some sections here, then we can actually try and run bits of the code without running the whole thing here. And then I also wanted to show you how to everyone how to put breakpoints in the code as well. Okay. So let me run this first bit. Actually, let me clear all, so I don't have all this stuff in my workspace. Go back here to that thing. I run this section. SCA means screen clear all, close all, get rid of all the graphics windows. Clear vars will do the variable clearing. We set this preference, make sure that we do this, and let's just figure out what happens here. So, okay. So screen num becomes 0, so that's the current one. What's up with this black and white index? Let's run this section here. What's up with that? This basically determines how the colors are mapped, right? So I think that's to do with whether you're doing things in 0 to 255 or 0 to 1. I think that might have something to do with that. Do you know what that does exactly?
What's that?
The white index and black index?
Yeah, it's a bit weird.
Yeah.
I think white index is always equal to...
Is always equal to the max, yeah. So you could imagine if you have a display where you are squishing the color map into a different range. For example, if you have a very high dynamic range display for very low contrast stimuli, you might have to futz around with those values, right? You might have to map your black and white values into a different part of the color map. That's sort of a bit vision sciencey, okay? So the next thing, the next section, if I run it, is actually going to start obscuring my view. So I'm not going to run it. Open window is going to open this black window, right? So I'm not going to run that. But let's just talk about what all of these other things are doing. This next line here goes, how many pixels are there on the screen at X and Y, right? That's just the window size. And that could change like dramatically, right? If you're on this machine, there's lots and lots of pixels. Maybe you have a slightly crappier display in your lab that still runs on VGA, some old mode. So obviously you don't want to hard code your stimuli to a particular pixel size if you're going to maybe move to a slightly different experiment rig, or you're going to give it to some undergraduate students who are going to run it in a computer lab where the sizes are completely different. So you need to compute those things. The flip interval IFI, I guess they call it here. That's how long it takes between frames, okay? So that's probably going to be like 16 milliseconds, or it might be 10 milliseconds, or it might be half of that if you're on a really fast monitor. And that's important because, for example, when you're trying to figure out how to move things across the screen, the step size that your object has to take depends on how much time has elapsed between each frame, okay? So if you have a very fast monitor, you need to take smaller steps, okay? So you want to have information about that. Here's a rectangle. We decide on a color in RGB. And this stuff, amplitude, frequency, start phase, that sets up something that has to do with sinusoidal changes, right? Because the box that we are drawing is going to move across the screen back and forth. And so what we're going to do is we want to make the position of this box dependent on what's happening in time, okay? And so essentially what we're doing is we're converting the current time into a little bit of a displacement along the x-axis, okay? And so you need some numbers for that. Don't know what max, I kind of know what max priority does. It basically makes sure that nothing else can interrupt the psychtoolbox. But if I was writing this from scratch, I would have probably forgotten to put that in, right? And then here's the main drawing loop, right? The main animation. So what's while tilde KB check? How does that work?
So it's like a while loop function, so it keeps going until inequality is or isn't true. So it'll keep going.
Yeah.
So that's while KB check isn't true. So
yeah.
when someone presses a key, then
yeah.
it will stop.
Yeah. So KB check basically returns true if somebody hit the keyboard somewhere, okay? Actually, I didn't check whether, I always hit the escape key. Did anybody try another key? Huh? It works with something else, okay? So if something happens on the keyboard, then that's going to be true. That means not KB true, right? It's going to be false. And so the while loop will stop acting, going around, okay? So this is sort of the keep on going forever until something happens loop. There's another way actually, so KB check does this as well. If you're interested in figuring out which button was being pressed, if you ask for true false, which is the first output argument, but you also ask for which keys were being pressed, you're going to get a list back of probably around 127 or so, a list, so a vector of length 127, where every entry is true or false depending on whether the key was being pressed down, okay? So that allows you to check whether a person did this or whether they did this, right? Right? So you can check for multiple key presses at the same time. Or you could check whether somebody pressed the shift button at the same time or whether they pressed 2 at the same time. In which case, simultaneous presses will cause more than one thing to be true in the whole list of buttons that are being pressed. Sometimes that's useful, right? I guess if you're doing simultaneity judgments, maybe, I don't know. Okay, so X position is going to be something that depends on the time, and it's a sine wave of the time. And then here, the center of the box just gets updated by this X position. So that's the thing that actually makes it move back and forth. Okay? And then you just draw the screen, draw the rectangle with screen, and then you do the flipping, and then you update the time. Now, actually, one thing I just wanted to check. I have a sense that time is actually a function, right? Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, okay. So that's, okay, I guess unless you're doing psychtoolbox and big data at the same time, I don't know whether you'll be doing that. That's not going to be a problem. But time actually happens to be a function in MATLAB. So maybe you could have chosen a slightly better thing here, right? So this is potentially a place where the variable shadow is something you might want to use somewhere else. Okay? Okay, and then end. And then at the end, clear screen all. So the issue with this script is if there's an error, if I make a typo somewhere here, it's going to break and going to stop, and then I can't get my window back. So in this setting, sometimes what you see, people use a try-catch setup. Has anybody seen this? Okay, so let me... It's a bit dangerous because I'm going to have to restart MATLAB if I make an error on purpose. So let me try, okay? So what might happen is, this might not even run, right? So I'm changing a variable name to something that doesn't exist, okay? Now I'm going to try and run it, but it's in a loop, so it's only going to start causing this error when we're right here. Okay, so let's try and do that. So it goes there, and it goes, oh. So my demo worked in the sense that it's broken, and I know there's an error message hidden behind, but now I can't get to it anymore, okay? So the magic sequence to try and get to it is, on the Mac, is you press Command 0, which gets you into the command window, and then you type SCA and hope for the best. Yeah, and it worked. Okay, good. All right? So this is dangerous, right? So if you're developing code, that's going to happen to you all the time. Like this would happen probably to me like 20 times an hour, at least, right? Every time I go, oh, I forgot to change that as well, so you get an error. Okay, so how can we make this better? If instead of doing all of this stuff here, as soon as I start running, I start, after the clear variables, a section that says try the following bit of code. Okay, so I'm going to say try at the beginning, and then I'm going to scroll all the way down to here, and I say catch. Okay, and you can see it connects up with the try all the way at the top. I'll do the indentation in a second so you can see what the layout actually is. And then in here I put SCA, end. Then what's going to happen is, so let me fix the formatting here by going to, up here you can see there's a thing called indent. If you do smart indent, actually I think you need to select all and then smart indent. It will update the layout of your code so it has the nice indentation, right? So the while loops and the for loops are all arranged. And you can see that whole section has moved to the inside because we're now in this giant try loop, which you can collapse so you can actually see what it looks like here, right? So it's, if I click the button on the left here, it collapses line 14 to 94. That's actually a convenient thing if you have multiple bits of if you have several for loops and you want to see the whole structure of your code, you can sort of collapse the code down, right? So I use that often as well, right? And then there's a catch bit at the end, which says, if I encounter an error in the first bit of the code, in the try loop bit, then rather than throwing an error, execute this other bit of code, okay? So the way I would use that, for example, is try and load this data file, and if it's not present, then give your user a nice error message saying, actually, this file isn't present, please check your spelling or something like that, rather than throwing a weird error message that nobody can understand, okay? So I fixed the code, so the first thing to check is that it actually works without an error, okay? So I reset the typo that I made before. Hopefully that will still work, so I should see the nice moving box. Okay, good. I press the any key. Okay, that's fine. And now I'm going to, on purpose, break the code again by doing the same mistake that I made, right? Square po, which doesn't exist, okay? And actually, let's say, put a thing here to say, we were in the catch part of the try catch. Just so we know that we were actually here, right? So let me run that script. No, it does not work. Oh, did I? Oh, G. Sorry, I put a G there by accident. Yeah, okay. Sorry, that was. Okay, we. Oh, okay. And it ended up, let's see, it actually did what I said it should do, right? Okay. So it encountered the error, but rather than messing your life up for the rest of the day and not being able to find the window again, it gracefully went to that other part of the loop and executed the piece of code, which is SCA, which does screen clear all. Okay. So probably this is a nice sort of way of sandboxing your code and making sure that when you're developing, you don't end up being frustrated with hidden things all the time. So, you know, it's not my idea, right? It's obviously, I've seen this in Mario Kleiner's code quite a lot, so he uses that. All right, cool. Okay, so I guess the final thing I wanted to show you is in this setting, actually there's two little things, which they're not cognitively very big loads, so hopefully that will work. Some of you have already seen me do this. Let's imagine I want to run, so I hit an error when I'm writing the code and I just can't figure out what's going on. What I'd really like to know is what's the state of some of the variables just before I get to the place where the error is. But everything happens so quickly and then there's an error message and I somehow can't recover and all of a sudden the variables are gone and I can't look at it anymore. So what you can use is something called the debugger. Okay, so on the left-hand side of your script, there's all these little hints of where actual lines of code are. Okay, so for example, if I click on this line, then I get a stop sign here. Okay, so what this means is when I press the play button on the script, it's going to execute everything to there, and then it's going to stop in mid-flight. Okay. This also works inside functions, actually, where it's even more useful because the function just cleans up its memory after it's done. In a script, you know, the variables stick around, so it's a bit easier to debug them. But in functions, it's all gone, right? So I can show you that in a different setting as well. So what happens if I try and run this? So I go here and I press the play button. Now you can see that I get a green arrow when I've arrived at this point, and the play button has changed into a different set of buttons, okay? From now on, so the first thing to note is I am just about to execute this line, okay? So white hasn't been defined. We're literally just in front of it. If I press the step button, then that one line gets executed. Okay, so if this is where your error happens, maybe that's already really useful just to figure out what it is, okay? What was the value of screen number? Maybe got messed up in some way that you didn't understand. You can run that bit of code, you can step, and then the other thing you could do is, once you're happy that you just want to continue going, you just press continue, and then the rest of the thing goes on, okay? While it's in the debugger, oh, I'm still got a typo, right? Let me fix the typo back again. While you're in the debugger, you can do all the plotting and everything like that, right? So let me just run one more time. You know that you're in the debugger because the prompt of MATLAB has changed to have a K in front of it, okay? It's keyboard interrupted. And you can type things in there, right? So for example, you know, screen num, you could interact with it this way. If you have a variable that contains data, you could even plot it, right? All of the other things are available to you. The only thing that's different is that you're sort of in the middle of executing this bigger program, and as soon as you're ready to keep going again, you can either stop or you can just run the rest of it. Okay, so that's really helpful when you're starting to get into problems that are sort of hard to track down. Okay, yep.
How do we open the debugger? Sorry?
You just put the red symbol there.
Why? I'm clicking on those things and it just opens up gracefully.
It opens what? Oh, because you're not running. So you can clear all down. For me, it's 154. Oh, but now it's not.
So psychtoolbox.
Because we're already looking at some more as well. Up here. So now for some now they're ready.
Because you've not got administrator right, you get those on your.
So making the stimuli, so it essentially, is it that the best thing to do is in SyncToolbox have, because this would essentially be like one condition or
Yeah.
one try.
Yeah.
So then you would probably have it as a function then, and then just have your main body.
Yeah. So I mean, you could.
How do you?
What
would be the input and output?
So the question was, if you have, this is just a slightly contrived example, right, of one trial essentially of something moving. Maybe this experiment is looking at how people track at multiple different speeds, right? So then what you want to do is you want to have something that presents a particular trial for some amount of time and then moves on to the next one and the next one and the next one, right? So whenever you see something that's similar to something that has happened just before, and the only way it differs is by some small change, right? For example, in the speed at which things were being presented, or the location, or the trial number, or whatever. To me, that smells of a function, right? So you probably want to have a function that can present a trial for 1 second, and its input arguments would be the parameters you want the stimulus to have, okay? So for example, in the orientation discrimination task that we coded up with the MSc students, we made a function that displayed a line stimulus at a particular angle, and you could say the angle, you specify the angle, and it would draw the angle, an angled line element, and wait until the person hit the key. That was the function, that function's job, okay? And it returned what orientation was shown, what did they press, okay? And then you went in a loop, you go to the next one. So inside the function, you probably have a small display loop, right, that presents things in a KB check thing, right? Because that's the unit of what's happening. You're waiting around until somebody gives you a response. And then there's a bigger loop on the outside that says, okay, now that this loop is done, the small trial loop, let's move on to the next trial. And then you call the function again, now this time with a slightly different speed, okay? And then you get the person to respond, was that faster or slower than the standard or whatever your task is? Does that make sense? No?
Yeah.
You seem puzzled.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, so let's...
Should we do it? I mean, I don't know.
I'm just thinking because, let's say, for example, I have sort of two things happening. So
Yeah.
I have, for example, I want unimodal stimuli or multisensory stimuli.
Yeah.
So it's two separate, or three separate conditions.
Yeah.
Visual, auditory, audiovisual.
Yeah.
And then, so that's, sounds like three different functions, three separate. I mean, you don't want it in one giant script.
Lots of people have one giant script.
Okay.
But if you're, so the way you need to think about stimuli, I think, is it's sort of, if things happen simultaneously,
Yeah.
They need to happen in the same function.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking. So should, like, visual only would have its own, audio only would have its own, audio-visual would have its own.
Shall we turn this one into a slightly more realistic version? Where, for example, that one version of this I could imagine is, let's imagine we have 5 different colors that we want to display, and we get people to press, was this a red one or yellow one or whatever, right? Something like that, okay? In which case you'd have to be able to display this moving thing with different colors, okay?
And just quickly, is the reaction times automatically recorded, or?
I think I don't know. No, well, it's not recorded, but you can get the timestamp of when the keyboard was being checked. And so you could have, if you record when, there's like get seconds,
Yeah.
when does the stimulus come on, and then you do a get secs whenever the So you might have a function that says when the keyboard's being pressed, what was the timestamp right now? Calculate the difference to previous. So yeah. In PsychoPy, I think you get it all for free. But in this setup, you sort of have to do this yourself, okay? All right. So I hope this is not too much, but I guess you're watching, right? So you can just switch on cruise control a little bit if you're feeling it, okay? So I think open window, screen size, get flip interval, all of those things, right? They're going to stay exactly the same. Let's think about which bits here we can break out into maybe as a separate function, okay? So, and what we need to know about it, okay? So let's just try and figure out whether we could even take all of this stuff out into a separate function and what we'd need to be able to do, okay? So if I say I'm going to try and take this bit of code here. So what this does, it loops the animation until a key is being pressed. And I'm going to do the thing that I mentioned this morning, and I'm going to say, do some creative wishful thinking. So by which I mean, I wish there was a function that displayed one trial. Okay, and I'm going to say display moving box trial. Okay, it's going to have some arguments that I'm still need to decide that we're going to have to pass into this function because of the way I just grabbed the code from right now. I'm going to make a new empty file and I'm going to paste in the bit of code that I stole just now. Okay. So I'm going to say, just make a comment, this was broken out of the psychtoolbox example script. Purpose, display a moving box with a particular color. Okay, I mean, we could do a million different things here, but I think that might be one to change, okay? So at some point, we need to figure out what the color is for this thing. So I'm just going to put a little thing here that says, need to figure this out. Okay, and so this is not even close to a function yet, right? Because I haven't written function at the top and end at the bottom. So I need to fix, but let me fix the indentation first. So, okay. So this needs to be turned into a function, right? So let's think about it. So I need to start with function. Does this need to actually return anything? So if we want to record what the person was pressing on every iteration, it should probably return to us some kind of response, okay? I'm going to skip that for now to at least make it a bit easier at the beginning. And I'm going to call this whatever my function was supposed to be called, right? Display moving box trial. Okay? Okay. What input arguments does it need? Well, we need to be able to specify the color for that trial, right? So one of the input arguments needs to be the color. That's the thing that's going to change every trial. And then actually turns out that there's a whole bunch of other things in here that I also need to be able to provide. So angular frequency, time, start phase, all of those things, right? How can I make this happen, right? So let's go back. Where's time defined? Time I think I can take all of those things inside my function, right? Because they're property of the stimulus, okay? So rather than feeding them into my function, let's put them inside. So I'm going to take that bit of code and also put it in the function at the top. Okay. So amplitude, frequency, angular frequency, start phase, and time are all taken care of. Time gets set to 0 every time we start displaying this trial. That makes sense, right? So the next time I come back to this function, I start with 0 again. So that means the animation gets reset to 0 every time. So that makes sense to me. X position is amplitude, blah, blah, blah. That means, yeah. And so the only thing that I don't have here is X center, base rect, and a window. Okay, let me just make a note of that. So, did I say X center, I think, is defined in the script, and it won't be visible here, right? So we need to think about that. So let me say things that need to come into the factory, right? Remember, the factory is sort of closed off to the function is closed off to the rest of the world, right? So we need to somehow bring that in. X center, I think. Base rect. And the window that we want to draw into, right? That got created by the open screen open window call that happens outside in the script, okay? I think everything else is there. Okay, so what do we need to do? So the color, we need to somehow put down there as well. Somehow we need to figure that out. So, well, let's make them input arguments to our function, okay? X center, base rect, and window. Base rect and window, so I can use tab completion because it knows about these things. And the question is, where is the color now? Rect color is actually what this is called. So I think I'm going to change rect color to the color to make sure. So this, oops. I need to figure this out, so I'll comment this out up here because that's going to be an input argument. This is fed into the function as the first argument. Okay, and then X center, base rect, and window. Oops. Those are the second, third, and fourth input arguments to our function. So I'm just going to put them underneath here as well, just as a comment to say that we're going to have taken care of them. Second, third, and fourth. Okay. And so now I have this function that what it does is it's going to try and run this snippet of code, and depending on what the input arguments are, the color, X center, base rect, and window, it's going to use that information, but we need to provide it, okay? So I'm just going to copy those things across into the script so I can remember which order things are present, right? Because my working memory is not good enough for that kind of stuff anymore. So copy. And then this function doesn't have a name yet, so I need to save it, and it takes that for the file. Okay. So now that it's got its own M file that's got the appropriate name, and now outside here, I need to fix and make sure that I can feed in all of this information that I still need to do. Okay. So the color, let's hard code it to something that we haven't used before. So it was a red thing before. How can we make yellow? Anybody know what yellow is in RGB? 011. Okay. X center is actually calculated here, right? So we can just use that variable name because it's a variable that's calculated right there. Base rect and window are the same name as well, sort of on purpose, right? So one thing that I didn't do at the beginning of the course is when we were writing functions, I sort of on purpose picked different argument names, input argument names, because I didn't want you to get confused about these names here, which are just for the purposes of this recipe, and the variable names that live somewhere else, right? These ones, the color, X center, base rect, and window, they are only for the purposes of this recipe, and the script doesn't know about it, okay? The main script happens to use variable names that are exactly the same, right? But they're completely different things. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So we've still got the try-catch thing, so hopefully that will, you know, even if we have broken something, that we do get a Y center, but I don't think we need it. Do we need it? Or it goes into the... Is it in the is it required in the function?
Yeah, center rect.
Ah, okay. Okay, thank you for catching that. So that would have been an error. Okay, so let's put that after the X center. Okay, thank you very much, Jason. So I would have, yeah, I was puzzling about that actually. So then I also need to fix that here. Okay. Okay. And so if I run the script, the worst thing that can happen is we're going to get caught out in this try-catch loop. So let's have a go. I'd be surprised if we don't get an error. Okay, yeah. What's wrong? Base rect. What's it complaining about? Something's... Okay, I don't... Oh, did I leave the PO thing still in place? No, is that... No, that's fine. Square X post gets calculated. Okay, well, so let's try and figure out how we can get there, right? So if we are... Yeah, it's really hard to debug what's going on here because we're now inside this function. Let's carefully check. Center rect, base rect. The color. Do I use the color somewhere else? I feel like maybe weight frames is something I haven't seen before. Or is that a function? Weight frames, okay. Right. So I'm going to transplant that from out here into the function. Right. I mean, this is a little bit artificial in the sense that I would never write my code this way. But it's, you know, it's worth giving a go. So the issue was I'm trying to use something called weight frames here, but it's defined outside in the script and not inside the function, right? So the factory workers are going, didn't even tell me what weight frames was, so I'm not going to just down tools, okay? So maybe this is going to work. No, still not good. Oh, the flip. We need the timestamp as well. The VBL needs to go in because that's also used on inside. Okay, so VBL. Okay, so I guess maybe this is an illustration of why you shouldn't do it this way. But VBL is a vertical blank, so. Nope, still no good. Okay. Sorry, which? Base rect as well? We put that as an input argument, so, but wait frames 1, VBL, IFI, window, centered rect. So actually one thing we can do is, if you say db stop if error, so that setting the debugger to throw you into the, but it's going to make it such that we're going to have a black screen probably. Oops. Quick debugging. This one, run the script. We'll be stuck with a black screen, I think. Okay. Oh no, it threw us into. Yeah, it doesn't, you can't do that actually, so that doesn't work.
Well, how would you do it then if you were?
Okay, so the way is to do that. So you comment this out and you do that and you live love, you live. No,
I mean, how would you program the experiment?
Oh, how would I do it?
Instead of.
I would be making, so let me just try that and see what happens. Yeah, and I appreciate this is not so much fun to watch, but it's real life. Okay, so now we've got an error, but at least we have an error. So if I go back and do 0 SEA, then we can see an error message. Okay, it's saying undefined screen X pixels. Okay. Okay, that's what's missing. Okay, so that's good. But you need to be able to do the command 0 trick, right? Otherwise you can't. So this variable here is also needs to be fed in, and then hopefully we're there. I guess my answer is I would do it in MGL and build it up. But this is probably not what you wanted to hear, right? So, but actually you still need to do the same kind of stuff. Okay, screen X pixels is fine. Okay, so let's try that one. And save this one. Run. Please, yellow box, come on. Okay, at this point, I would probably start swearing. IFI, we defined that. We have IFI. Oh, okay. I made the same mistake that happened to somebody before, which is we're trying to update it. Yes, okay, all right. I understand. This is, so we're trying to use IFI, but we haven't defined it, okay? So it's the same thing. So we also need to put in the, I guess we could probably do that on the inside actually as well. Query the frame duration. So we could probably do that on the inside of the function. So I'll do the whole thing. Yeah. We'll do that at the beginning here, wait frames. Yeah, so this bit of code is not going to win a beauty contest. So I think I would have entered some of my other scripts in for any competition like that. Probably not this one. Woohoo! The only problem is it's not yellow, it's blue. I got that wrong. Okay. All right, cool. I told you it was going to be ugly, right? So, okay. So how does this help? So now I have a function that every time I change the color, I can just call it again, okay? So what could I do here? let's make a little loop, okay?
Oh, okay. Okay.
For just, I'll hard code it. I trial is equal 1 to 3. I'm going to run it 3 times. But to make it more interesting, I'm going to say all colors is equal to, and let's set it to, so if you say jet of 3, what does that do? It makes a color map that, and fills it with the jet colors that go, you know, the one that everybody complains about. Do you know what I'm talking about? No? Sorry. 256. Let me say figure, image, SC, brand 100. You don't need to type this. I just want to show you. Okay. This is a new color map called Parula, which is okay for because it's perceptually balanced. So all the colors have sort of same significance. But if you say color map jet, you get what used to be the default a while back, which is this one. Okay, does people recognize that, right? Color bar. Okay, goes from the lowest value blue to the highest value in red, and people always complain about the fact that it sort of introduces these weird transitions in what things look like when there shouldn't really be any transition there. So it's a good idea if you have something that changes smoothly from one value to another, not to use these kinds of color maps, right? However, it's a very convenient way of making colors quickly, right? So you can make 12 colors that look like a rainbow, or 3 colors that look like a rainbow. Okay, so that's what the Jet 3 does. Okay, and now I have all colors where every row contains a different color. And so now I'm going to go and pick one of those rows off every time I go in here, right? On the first trial, I want row number 1. On the second trial, I want row number 2. On the third trial, I want row number 3. So I want I trial colon. Okay. And then, so if this works like I expect it to, then it's going to display a box in one color. I hit escape. It'll display the next box in the next color and so on. Okay. Nope. Did a typo? What did I do?
Oh, I think you put all rows instead of colors.
Ah, okay, thank you. Yeah, that's it's the problem with talking at the same time as doing things. Okay, so that's the blue one. Ah, what's it doing now?
I think you have press a key end in our function, right?
Oh, it ends
So
it.
it's just going to keep looping until we press a key, so you can't press a key to change the color. Just close.
In the So I'm doing it in the trial though, right? So what is it? So while not KB check, it does this, right? And then it comes back and it should really continue. Ah, you know what, actually? I think I know what's happening. I'm pressing the button and it enters the function the second and the third time so quickly that we can't even see it. Okay? So what I think we need to do is, after this thing here, when we enter, we need to do wait sex 0.5. 500 millisecond wait, okay? So this is the thing that often happens with keyboards. You press the button, but you can't press it for only 1 millisecond. You press it and the button stays down for 200 or 300 milliseconds. And in the meantime, the computer is so fast, it gets to the next and the next one, okay? So let me see whether that fixes it. So, okay, so go back here. Yeah, I think that would have been a hard one to debug if you, so yeah. the first time you meet, you know, this is a really weird thing, right? That you wouldn't. Yes. Okay, and then the third time, half a second, and then woohoo! Okay, that's cool. All right, good stuff. So, right, so obviously maybe moving boxes in yellow isn't your thing, but the mechanics of picking another set of parameters to displaying something else and waiting for it, that's going to be very similar across many different experiments, right? You display a face. Was it angry or disgusted? Hit button 1 or 2, right? Move on to the next trial. Do the same thing. Or play this sound. Did that sound longer than the visual flash or shorter, right? It's all the sort of same idea, okay? And then the next thing that I would change if we had a bit more time and mental energy would be, in order to get the response out of the function that displays the trial, you probably want to return which button was being pressed and whether it was correct or incorrect. And then you can accept that information in the script that runs it and accrue it over the duration of many trials. And then at the end, you just make sure that you save it out, and then you can analyze it after the fact.
So you would just do that like before, just have an array